Hello, everyone, and welcome to the world-renowned review/recap of AMC's The Terror. I am the world-renowned historian. So, this is kind of a different direction for the channel as I continue to develop the channel and get a little better at what I'm doing, kind of get more of an idea of what I'm doing and what I want to do, and continue to create more high-effort content and higher-effort content. This is the first time I've reviewed something that's still ongoing. In this video, I'll be talking about the first 3 episodes because only 3 episodes are out as of the time I record this, April 3rd, 2018. Now, I'm going to keep these mostly spoiler-free, or at least as much as is possible while still recapping and giving my thoughts on the show. Now, if I remember correctly, it's only a 10-episode miniseries, so at the end I may do a full review along with spoilers and all. I don't know, I haven't decided yet. So this story is based on the real-life event of the 1845 Franklin expedition, which was one of the many expeditions sent out by the British to hopefully find the Northwest Passage, which would be like a route through the Arctic from Britain to China, but like way faster than going the long way around Africa and India and all that jazz. Now, I won't tell you what happened to the expedition in case that's like a spoiler for the show or whatever. I mean, the history is like 200 years old and it's reasonably well known, but just in case you've never heard it before, I won't divulge that information. But the great science fiction author Dan Simmons basically took this real-life story and added a monster to it. And it's awesome. So I discovered Simmons' book in 2012 when another author who I like brought it up in an interview. And in fact, I was listening via YouTube on my television to the audiobook as I wrote notes for this review. And I, in fact, have the show on in the background right now as I'm recording this review. So I absolutely love this book. Personally, it's in my top 5 books of all time. I don't think it's exaggeration at all to call it a modern Moby Dick, from which, by the way, Simmons took the epigraph for his book, which opened this video. A lot of reviewers thought it was too long, but, like, I don't know. I was completely transfixed throughout. Like, you know, it's just like Roger Ebert said, you know, no good movie is too long, no bad movie is short enough. Like, some other reviewers thought that there was a little too much nautical stuff in it, like Simmons was just, like, showing off his research. But that completely worked for me. Like, it just immersed me in their worlds. Like, it totally felt like this is how these people would talk and think about the world they're in. But yes, anyway, the show is based on Simmons' book. So first of all, this show is beautiful. Like, sometimes starkly, like, brutally so, in the sense of like a Cormac McCarthy novel, but it's absolutely gorgeous to look at. Like, this is how you do CGI correctly. The stark, endless white expanse of the Arctic is almost a character in itself. Like, it's incredible to me that they shot this show essentially almost entirely in a studio, indoors. Like, it just looks perfect and seamless. This just really looks like a brutal world that just goes on forever. There are 3 scenes in particular that I want to highlight as to the incredible visual style of this show. So in episode 2, a character has to go underwater to try to dislodge ice out of the propellers of the Erebus. And he has to put on this, like, 19th century scuba suit. And yes, by the way, they had those. And once he gets underwater, like, the world has this, like, dreamy, surreal, almost hallucinogenic quality to it. Like, he's alone down there. Like, he's the only living thing in visible distance. So, like most people's idea of the ocean, this seems unrealistic. Like, there's plenty of life in the ocean. So you think they're doing this, like, impressionistic, hallucinogenic thing, but, like, this is actually what the Arctic is like. You know, like, there's not a ton of life there. It's like you in the ice. You know, like, ships go down up there and they don't decompose because there's just nothing there to decompose them. Second is just a brief conversation between Captain Crozier and his ice master Thomas Blanky. They're talking, kind of hanging onto the rigging near the crow's nest of the Terror, and just the casualness with which they do this. And like, it's just such a visually striking scene, and it just drives home the, both their competence and their ease and comfort around the dangers of a ship, and just them being that high off the ground and just having a casual conversation. It drives home like their sort of mutual trust and relationship, and also in a way just the situation that the men are in. They're in this precarious, balanced position, if you will. The third is in episode 3, where a particular character is grabbed by the monster, and we see this character from the monster's point of view, sort of hanging high off the ground. We see his face sort of looking up at the monster. And this ends up like juxtaposed with another scene where this character is at a theater and back in Britain, and they're sort of accepting that the adulation and the glory from the crowd, and it's shown with like shots of the ceiling of the theater, but from the point of view of the character who's being carried in the jaws of the monster. And it's one of the best examples of just wonderful visual storytelling and juxtaposition I've seen in a long time. It's a perfect juxtaposition of the brutal Arctic reality with the sort of idealistic heroism with which people invested these Arctic explorers. Juxtaposition and the meeting of discordant imagery is a major theme in this show, at least in the first 3 episodes. And that is, of course, the story of the Age of Exploration, right? Like, you have, the natives who have learned to thrive in this environment, but who the ostensibly more technologically advanced Europeans view as inferior. That's a very strong juxtaposition from the Age of Exploration. Such imagery is all over this show. Like, it keeps happening over and over. You get the common men all eating together, and it's this loud, boisterous affair. And then immediate smash cut to the officers dining in Franklin's, private chamber. And it's just this completely different sort of vibe and very different atmosphere. There's this great flashback where our main characters are at the theater, and there's these scenes of, previous great Arctic explorers being played out on the stage. And, our main characters all stand up and get this standing ovation from the attendees. And, you get this like weird, like World War I, like romanticized danger sort of vibe from it. And then you get immediate smash cut to Terror in Erebus, stuck in the ice. And it's this like wonderful bird's eye view. And like, you just see all this ice around them, and it's a wonderful sense of impending doom. You certainly get the juxtaposition of the 2 captains. Like, Crozier is this low-born drunk who happens to be incredibly, supremely competent, and really probably should be in command of the mission. And he's also this like harsh, cynical realist, while Franklin is, your proper English gentleman, who's also a hyper-religious teetotaler who is just kind of caught up in the idealism of this sort of noble attitude about his profession. They have a conversation in episode 3 where this juxtaposition between them really comes to a head. And by the way, all the dialogue throughout the show, and just the show in general, is extremely well written. The only quibble I have with the writing of the show so far in the first 3 episodes is there's a scene where there's a dying Inuit man, and there's another Inuit there speaking their native language, obviously, and it's subtitled, and other characters there don't speak the language, but certain others do, and the ones who don't speak it are like, oh, what are they saying? And the ones that speak it are translating. And that's kind of a mistake in screenwriting. Like, you don't need to tell people things twice. Like, you don't need to tell your viewers things twice. We already read the subtitle. We don't need to hear, oh, what did she say? She said this, exactly what it said in the subtitle already. Like, it's kind of a minor quibble, but it's just a thing in screenwriting. You don't need to repeat things. But since we brought them up, let's talk about the characters. Now, most of the main characters are based on the actual people of the Franklin expedition, and Simmons seems to have gone to some trouble to design their personalities in his story after what they were actually like in life. For instance, we do know that Franklin was a very religious teetotaler, and we also know that Crozier was rather pessimistic about the chances of the voyage. Captain Francis Crozier is played by the wonderful Jared Harris, and he's simply one of my favorite characters in all of fiction. You know, profoundly disappointed in life, cynical, bitter, perpetually drunk. He isn't really comfortable unless he's uncomfortable. He happens to be smarter than anyone else on the voyage, but the social mores of his time wouldn't let him advance any further than he already has. He's just on the other side of a particularly painful romantic disappointment in his life, and this was really the defining moment in his life, and it's the reason he's throwing himself at the Arctic. Over and over and over and over again. But here's the thing, though. He's good at it. Yes, he's the best sailor on the voyage by a long shot. He doesn't want to give a speech. He doesn't want to go to Franklin's religious services, but he is a goddamn good sailor. The idealistic Fitzjames and Franklin think he's just a terrible mope, and to some extent, they may be right. But Crozier is probably right that the Arctic is simply just trying to kill them. Captain John Franklin and Commander James Fitzjames are played by the wonderful Ciarán Hinds and Tobias Menzies, and if those two guys look familiar, well, Internet, you've earned yourself a cookie. Yes, that is Julius Caesar and Brutus from HBO's Rome. Fitzjames in episode 1 even says something about how he felt like he was Caesar crossing the Rubicon, which I thought was a very nice touch. This is actually their third show working together, as both were in Game of Thrones, as Mance Rayder and Edmure Tully, respectively, but I don't think they actually shared any scenes there. Fitzjames is a young, confident officer who's known nothing but success. He's definitely a bit of a silver spoon baby, but he's not a moron. You know, he's actually like a beloved celebrity back in England for his war exploits, but Crozier definitely kind of hates him, like he thinks he's a bit of a blowhard. But these two characters have a very, very interesting arc over the course of the rest of the story. Now, Simmons' Sir John Franklin was a bit of a buffoon, and I'm glad that Ciarán Hinds' portrayal is a little bit more forgiving. Hinds' John Franklin is a man kind of stuck in the idolization of men who were once peers but have now passed him by. And Franklin does not have that lone great accomplishment on his explorer's record, the way, for instance, James Clark Ross does. You know, this has left him with something of an inferiority complex, I think. I see Franklin as a man caught up in the idealism of his work. Like, he simply cannot conceive of a situation where he will not be the individual to find the Northwest Passage. You know, again, that theater scene is very instructive. You know, they show him depictions of all these wonderful accomplishments of the men of his era and the era directly before, and then he stands and receives adulation, though he himself has actually accomplished very little. There's another wonderful scene a little bit later where the very elderly James Clark Ross confronts Franklin about the specifics of his expedition. You know, how much coal do you have? What is the draft of your ship, etc., etc. And Ross knows them better than Franklin does, even though Franklin's commanding the expedition. You know, I don't think Franklin's a fool necessarily. He's just too caught up in the idea of being part of history to where he's forgotten that he needs to be a little bit more of a cynical pragmatist like Crozier. Franklin is just too desperate to join those giants of his field by discovering the Northwest Passage. I'm going to return to the characters again in a later video. Specifically probably Dr. Goodsir, Cornelius Hickey, and of course the all-important Lady Silence. So just a few words here about the monster and this many-faceted title. I don't want to say too much about the monster yet, except to say that Simmons clearly did a fairly deep dive on Inuit mythology. I do absolutely love that they haven't shown it at all yet in these first 3 episodes. You know, of course, Spielberg famously signed on to make Jaws if he didn't have to show the shark in the first hour. And I think that's one of the most brilliant things anyone's ever done in a monster movie. You know, there are many terrors in this story. It's, of course, the name of one of the ships. You know, you've got the flagship Erebus, commanded by Franklin, and you've got Terror, commanded by Crozier. It's the nickname that the crew give to the monster who's picking them off one by one as they're frozen out there in the ice. There's the terror of their fellow man, which may become more of an issue later in the show as the situation becomes increasingly desperate. Alright, anyways, everybody, that's it for now. If you're watching this show, you reacted to anything I said, I'd love to hear from you. Like, dislike, more importantly, comment, subscribe, and I will see you all next Tuesday. Until next time, this is the World Renowned Historian. Be good, kiddos. I'm out.